There are experiences that do not arrive as answers. They arrive as interruptions. Nothing dramatic happens, no voice speaks, no image appears. And yet, something inside you stops. The mind pauses not because it understands, but because it senses that understanding is not welcome here. This is not fear in the ordinary sense. Fear has an object. Fear points somewhere. This is different. It is the sensation of standing before something that does not present itself, yet makes itself undeniable. A presence without form, a magnitude without direction. The instinct is not to run, the instinct is to shrink. Not physically, but internally. Certainties loosen, language hesitates. The ego, usually so eager to explain, suddenly finds no leverage. In that moment, control feels inappropriate. Not impossible, inappropriate. As if the situation itself were signaling that analysis would be a mistake. What emerges instead is a quiet tension, a mix of unease and attraction. You do not want to be there, but you do not want to leave. And this contradiction is the key. Because whatever this encounter is, it does not ask for belief. It does not demand obedience. It only demands recognition. The strange thing about this encounter is that it does not feel personal. It does not seem directed at you, yet you feel addressed. Not chosen, not targeted, simply present at the wrong scale. This is why the experience feels humbling without being moral. Nothing is judging you. Nothing is evaluating your worth. And still, you feel small. Not reduced, but repositioned. The mind searches for familiar categories. Is this danger? Is this meaning? Is this imagination? None of them fit. Because this presence does not threaten harm, it threatens proportion. It reminds you that your thoughts, plans, fears, and identities are not the axis around which reality turns. That realization carries weight. For some, it becomes discomfort. For others, denial. But for those who stay with it, something more subtle emerges, a quiet fascination. The same force that unsettles also attracts. Not because it promises reward, but because it feels fundamental. As if beneath all explanations, this is closer to the truth of existence than anything neatly articulated. And the ego senses that, which is why it resists. What unsettles the ego most is not the feeling of being overpowered, but the feeling of being unnecessary. In everyday life, the self is central. Decisions depend on it. Plans orbit around it. Meaning is filtered through it. But in this encounter, the self is not required. Reality does not respond. It does not adjust. It does not acknowledge your presence. And that indifference is louder than any threat. Because if the world does not need you to function, then your importance becomes conditional. This is where many people turn away. They label the experience as illusion, hallucination, psychological noise, anything to restore the familiar hierarchy. But those who remain a moment longer notice something unexpected. The absence of centrality brings relief. When you are not essential, you are also not responsible for holding everything together. The burden of control loosens. Thought slows. Breathing deepens. Time feels less linear. The mind stops asking what this means and starts sensing how it feels. And in that shift, a different mode of awareness emerges. Not analytical, not emotional, observant. As if consciousness itself were standing back, watching both the world and the self from a quieter distance. This shift in awareness feels unfamiliar because it is not goal-oriented. Nothing is being achieved. Nothing is being solved.
There is no insight to capture, no conclusion to extract. And that absence creates discomfort. The modern mind is trained to move forward, to optimize, to convert experience into utility. But this state resists that impulse. It does not reward effort. It does not respond to intention. Trying to control it makes it disappear. Trying to define it makes it shrink. What remains is a form of attention that does not reach outward. It stays, watching without grabbing, noticing without naming. In this state, the boundary between observer and observed softens. Thoughts arise, but they no longer demand obedience. Emotions pass, but they no longer claim ownership. Even the sense of identity feels lighter, less rigid, less defended. It is not transcendence. Nothing has been escaped. It is simply a reduction of interference. And in that reduced noise, something quiet becomes perceptible. Not a message, not a truth, a presence of depth. As if reality, stripped of commentary, were vast enough on its own.
After this encounter, something subtle changes. Not dramatically, not visibly. Life resumes its rhythm. Tasks return. Noise reappears. But the sense of absolute solidity is gone. You remember, even if vaguely, that beneath appearances there is depth, that beneath explanation there is excess. This memory does not stay conscious. It does not announce itself. It lingers as restraint. You speak a little less. You rush a little less. Certainties feel provisional, not because you doubt everything, but because you have felt the limit of doubt itself. This is not wisdom in the traditional sense. No rule has been learned. It is calibration, a quiet adjustment of proportion between the self and what surrounds it. You still act, you still decide, you still desire. But somewhere in the background, there is the awareness that none of this is final, that something larger does not oppose you nor support you. It simply is. And that realization, once felt, cannot be fully undone. Because what was encountered was not an idea. It cannot be argued away. Ideas can be replaced. Beliefs can be revised. Opinions can shift. But experiences that alter scale leave residue. They change how reality is measured. Before, the world felt arranged around intention. After, intention feels like a surface phenomenon. Useful, but not fundamental. This does not create passivity, it creates precision. You become less inclined to dramatize, less eager to impose meaning where none is required. The need to constantly interpret weakens, not because interpretation is false, but because it is no longer necessary for stability. Something deeper now carries weight. Silence stops feeling empty. It feels inhabited. Not by entities, not by messages, but by density. As if existence itself had thickness. And in moments of stillness, you sense that thickness again. Briefly, quietly. Enough to remind you that what matters most rarely announces itself. Over time, this awareness begins to surface in unexpected places. Not during reflection, but during ordinary moments. Walking without destination, standing in line, waking before thought returns. For a brief second, the familiar world loosens its grip. Objects feel less solid. Concerns feel less urgent. Not meaningless, just lighter. This is not detachment from life, it is intimacy without possession. You engage, but without the old tension of needing outcomes to justify existence. The world no longer feels like a puzzle to solve, nor a threat to manage. It feels like something unfolding without reference to you. And instead of erasing meaning, this expands it. Meaning stops being manufactured and starts being encountered, quietly, indirectly, as something that cannot be held, only noticed. And once noticed, never fully forgotten. This is why these experiences resist explanation. The moment you try to turn them into concepts, they lose their weight. They flatten. What was vast becomes manageable. What was unsettling becomes familiar, and familiarity dissolves the effect. This is not because language fails, but because language domesticates. It turns the ungraspable into something usable, and this encounter was never meant to be used. It does not exist to guide behavior, or to provide comfort, or to justify belief. It exists as a boundary, a reminder that not everything yields to interpretation, that some dimensions of reality remain intact precisely because they are not accessed directly. When this boundary is respected, something healthy occurs. The urge to dominate softens. The need to conclude weakens. Curiosity remains, but it becomes quieter, more attentive, less invasive, as if understanding itself had learned restraint. Because once this boundary is sensed, a subtle responsibility appears. Not an obligation imposed from outside, but an internal restraint. You become careful with absolute claims, careful with certainty that closes questions instead of opening space. Not because truth disappears, but because complexity reveals itself. You notice how easily humans confuse clarity with control and explanation with ownership. To name something often feels like possessing it. But this encounter teaches the opposite, that some realities retain their power only when they are not reduced. This does not weaken reason, it refines it. Reason becomes a tool, not a throne. Useful within limits, dangerous when mistaken for totality. And in that refinement, humility emerges naturally, not as virtue, as accuracy. A clearer sense of where the self ends and where something larger begins. With this shift, the way you relate to meaning changes. Meaning no longer needs to be extracted from every experience. Some moments are complete without interpretation. Silence, especially, gains a different quality. It stops feeling like absence and starts feeling like containment, as if something is being held back, not revealed. This creates patience. You no longer rush to fill gaps with explanation or noise. You allow uncertainty to remain open, not as a problem to solve, but as a condition of depth. Because depth requires darkness, not ignorance, but unavailability. And in that unavailability, existence regains dimension. Life becomes less about mastery and more about alignment. Not alignment with a goal, but with scale, with proportion, with the recognition that not everything is meant to come forward. Some things remain powerful precisely because they stay partly hidden. Over time, you realize this encounter does not belong to a specific moment anymore. It spreads. It subtly reorganizes how experiences are weighted. What once felt urgent now feels contextual. What once felt overwhelming now feels partial. This does not make life smaller, it makes it layered. You begin to sense that reality operates on multiple depths at once. The surface remains active: work, relationships, decisions, consequences. But beneath it, something steady persists. Not guiding, not interfering, simply present. And because of that presence, you stop demanding total answers from temporary situations. You allow events to be incomplete. You allow questions to remain unanswered without anxiety. This is not resignation, it is trust without object. A confidence not placed in outcomes, but in the fact that not everything requires resolution.
Some things stabilize precisely because they are not forced to close.
As this integration deepens, you notice a change in how you relate to others. Not through distance, but through restraint. You become less inclined to impose conclusions, less eager to correct inner worlds you cannot access, because you have seen how easily depth collapses when handled without care. This creates a different kind of respect. Not agreement, not tolerance, recognition. An awareness that each person carries their own thresholds, their own encounters with scale. Some have felt it, some have not, and that difference does not need to be resolved. You speak when necessary, you listen more than before, not because silence is superior, but because not everything benefits from articulation. This is where humility becomes relational, not self-effacing, but precise. Knowing when presence is enough, an explanation would only intrude.
Eventually, you stop seeking to recreate the experience. You understand that repetition would miss the point. What mattered was not the intensity, but the reorientation. Chasing the feeling would turn it into an object, and objects lose their power once pursued. So instead, you let it arrive on its own terms, or not arrive at all. This removes a subtle tension that often hides behind spiritual curiosity, the need for confirmation, the desire for reassurance. You no longer ask, "Will this happen again?" because the question itself belongs to a former way of measuring value. What remains is availability, an openness without expectation. You live normally, but with the quiet awareness that depth does not need invitation. It appears when conditions allow, and when it does not, nothing essential is missing. What ultimately changes is not how you see the extraordinary, but how you see the ordinary. Daily life no longer feels separate from depth. The mundane becomes porous. A room, a street, a quiet moment at the end of the day can suddenly carry weight. Not symbolic weight, actual presence. This does not make life mystical, it makes it honest. You stop expecting meaning to arrive dramatically. You notice it arriving sideways, through stillness, through proportion, through the absence of insistence. The world does not reveal itself because you ask correctly. It reveals itself because you stop demanding. And in that release, attention sharpens. You are not waiting for something else anymore. You are here. And here, it turns out, was never empty. In the end, nothing needs to be concluded. There is no final insight to secure, no statement strong enough to contain what was sensed. And that is precisely the point. This encounter was never meant to become knowledge. It was meant to introduce proportion, to quietly realign the self within a reality that does not revolve around explanation. Once that realignment occurs, life continues, not elevated, not diminished, simply clearer. You act, but without urgency to justify existence. You think, but without the need to dominate meaning. You remain human, fully involved, yet no longer mistaken about scale. And somewhere beneath language, beneath belief, beneath identity, the awareness remains that there is more than can ever be brought forward, and that knowing this is not a loss, it is balance.